Hi, I'm Mark Gagan with Wessex Press. I'm talking today with my friend Steve Doyle, the founder and publisher of the legendary Sherlock Holmes Review magazine. Steve, why don't you give us a little history of the magazine?
The Sherlock Holmes Review was a Sherlockian journal that I started in 1986. I was 26 years old. I was newly married, relatively newly married, and I had no publishing experience whatsoever. I had recently graduated from college, just a few years prior to being married. I wasn't out of school long. I wasn't married long, and but my wife Pamela had been working as a grad student in the Department of English at Indiana University in Bloomington, Indiana, and she had landed a job working for a sort of literary prose and poetry magazine called Indiana Review. The similarity in names is not a coincidence. And I watched her edit this publication, which was quite nice, and started getting the idea that it would be fun to do a Sherlockian journal. There was a lot of them being done then, by the way, small ones, regional ones or Scion Society-based ones, as well as, of course, the big ones. The Baker Street Journal and the Baker Street Miscellanea, primarily Sherlock Holmes Journal in England. And I had no idea at the time that what I was thinking of doing would ever rise to that level. But as you know, we always think big here. So I just got the idea. I said, oh, I'm going to do it. How hard can it be?
Well, let me ask you a question. How many of the very first issue did you print?
We printed 100 copies of the very first issue. 100?
Yes. So may I say, they're rather rare on the ground.
They're very rare on the ground. You can find them popping up on eBay occasionally, or I think sometimes if you go to like ABE Books or something, ABE Books, you can find copies. And sometimes those first two issues particularly are quite... I've been astonished at some of the prices that they go for because they are extremely rare.
Now, how many years has it been since the last review was published?
It's been a long, long time. I want to say 96, I think, is when the last one came out.
We hear of the Sherlock Holmes Review to this day. It comes up in conversations with Sherlockians. There still seems to be an interest in the magazine.
People remember it quite fondly. It was not like anything else that was being published at the time. And that was deliberate. That was a goal of mine. I wanted it to stand out. I didn't want it to look like any of the other ones that were being published, whatever level they were being published at. I didn't want it to have the same kind of content. I didn't want it to have the same vibe. I wanted it to be its own thing. And I think people responded to that. I think they recognized that this is something different, and it was. It was. We've gone on to do all kinds of things since those long ago days, but I look back on the review with a lot of fond memories because it was, in its day, something to behold, I think.
And that brings us to the purpose of this interview, which is to make an announcement about what's ahead for the Sherlock Holmes Review, because we have something very special in mind. Steve, why don't you tell us about it?
I'd be happy to. So what we're going to do is the Sherlock Holmes Review is making a return. It's coming back as a new publication. It's coming back not as a quarterly publication, which is what it was, but it's coming back as an annual. And we hope to be bringing this out every January, starting in January 2021. But over the course of this year, which is 2020, we are bringing out all the back issues in a series of 3 omnibus editions. And the first one is coming out now. Make its debut in New York in the Merchant's Room of the BSI Weekend on Saturday morning, January 17. And it will contain the first volume of the Sherlock Holmes Review in sort of an omnibus facsimile reproduction in all its glory, all its handmade glory in that first volume. And we're really excited about it.
And some of the interesting things in that are not only the first 2 issues that you referred to, but the issue 3-4, which was a combined double issue, which had some very special interviews in it, as I recall.
It did. One of the main features of Sherlock Holmes Review was the fact that we did, well, first of all, we had no rules. We weren't bound by a long tradition of publishing or by sort of a stuffy idea that we all had to be scholarship. Of course, we published scholarship, but we published everything else too. And one of the things we did, we inaugurated it in our second issue, was an interview series that went all the way through, right to the end of the run. And we have had the opportunity to speak to some amazing people. And Volume 1, Number 2, we had our first interview was with Jack Tracy, PSI, of dubious and questionable memory. Jack was the publisher of Gaslight Publications, and he went on to have a sort of unfortunate history after that. But at the time, he was on the top of his game and gave us a great interview. But we followed that up in the double issue that concluded that year with interviews with Jeremy Brett and Peter Cushing. And really quite proud of those interviews, particularly the Brett interview. The Brett interview turned out, he was, first of all, he's at the top of his game, and he has he had just finished shooting The Sign of Four in Malta and had come back and gave us an interview. And the great thing about that is, I've seen that interview quoted, unattributed, by the way, in numerous places over the years, and it's not a surprise because it's probably one of the longest and most detailed and comprehensive interviews that he gave at that time. And that alone is worth the price of admission. And it was a great experience.
And in that issue, you also got the chance to interview one of my favorite Sherlocks of all time, Peter Cushing.
We did, indeed. He was retired, but he gave us an interview. Of course, we took the opportunity to speak to him a little bit about his relationship with Christopher Lee and all those terrific Hammer horror movies, too, of which we're big fans of. And that was, what can you say? It was a great experience.
So for those of you who didn't have a chance to go along on this ride originally, the original run of the Sherlock Holmes Review is coming back in this new form. And then beginning next January, you'll get to see an all-new Sherlock Holmes Review as an annual from Gasogene Books. Thank you, Steve.
Well, thank you, Mark. And I hope those of you who didn't experience it for the first time enjoy it as much now as we all did back then.